Griffith is coming on because of the story that came out this morning in the warrant that has been issued for Jalen Carter, the defensive tackle, some consider to be the top player in the draft in Indianapolis. Warrant issued for 2 misdemeanor charges for reckless driving and racing in the crash that took the life of a former teammate and a Georgia staff member back in mid-January. And the details coming out include him changing his story with police, and according to reports and including Griffith reporting in Atlanta Journal-Constitution, left the scene, came back at the request of an officer at 4:15 a.m. after, who knows, over the last hour and a half, what he did or didn't do. But originally he said he was a mile away from the scene. Point being, the stories have changed. And Chad, the question is, what does Jalen Carter do? How does this now move forward through the process where he's currently not in Indy per reporters? He's scheduled to talk today, but he has not been seen. If he's in Indianapolis, Chad, he's not going to be there very long because he's got his attorneys and representatives talking with police to head back to Athens.
Yeah, he released a statement that it looked like it was drafted by an attorney, but it was written in all caps. I mean, it looks like something he just hammered out. And in that statement, he says, I'm headed back. And here it is, the statement from Jalen Carter. This morning, I received a telephone call from the Athens, Georgia Police Department informing me that 2 misdemeanor warrants have been issued against me for reckless driving and racing. Numerous media reports also have circulated this morning containing inaccurate information concerning the tragic events of January 15th, 2023. It is my intention to return to Athens and answer the misdemeanor charges against me, and to make certain that the complete and accurate truth is presented. There is no question in my mind that when all of the facts are known, that I will be fully exonerated of any criminal wrongdoing. This from Jalen Carter. Now, the police report that has been published by Seth Emerson and others out there is very straightforward. He was racing the car. There were 2 vehicles. There were 3 involved, but one was his. Yeah, it was his car, it was his vehicle, and the vehicle that had the tragedy happened with it. And they were racing, going 104 miles per hour, and weaving in and out of other cars that were on the road as well at the time. And it led to this tragic incident. So, look, I don't know what Jalen Carter's claiming that he has, and he's going to go defend himself. He has every right to defend himself. There's various reports that there are city cameras that caught all of this. So if he's not there or wasn't a part of it, I think it'd be pretty easy for him to prove, quite frankly, if that's in fact the case, if he says he's getting exonerated of these charges. Important to keep in mind, just from a legal standpoint, that these are misdemeanor charges. They're not felonies. It's awful. Todd McShay took a lot of heat for saying there were some character concerns about him, and then this comes out. Maybe he knew about this, maybe he didn't. I don't know. But look, is it going to affect his draft stock? I don't think so. Not to any great extent. I mean, does he fall out of the top 5? Maybe.
According to all of the outlets reporting on this, he faces up to 12 months in prison. So it's
for the 2 misdemeanors.
Yes, plus a $1,000 fine. I mean, we're serious. And so here's the backstory, and I'm reading straight.
And call me crazy, I just don't think he's going to face those 12 months.
Well,
that's the maximum that he could get. I feel like he's going to have a good enough attorney to plead that down. He's not going to see any real jail time. That's going to affect his career. Again, just talking about this from the NFL standpoint. And people are wanting to make the connection between this and Brandon Miller, and I was getting tweets that, hey, bring that same energy you guys brought to Brandon Miller to Jalen Carter. My response to that would be, it would be the same energy if this happened in season and Kirby Smart didn't suspend him or do anything to him at all after this happened. Then we'd carry the same energy. It's 2 very different stories. This is after the season. We've said throughout, I don't think any of this really affects Brandon Miller's draft stock. He's going to have to answer questions about it and do a good job of answering questions, but he's still going to get drafted in the first 3 or 4 picks of the NBA draft. I kind of feel the same about Jalen Carter, unless, Hutton, what you say happens and he actually has to face jail time.
Well, so here are the details. I'm just going to read straight from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And McShay's comments came out before the wreck even took place. about the character issues.
Yeah.
So here is they have on surveillance footage at the stoplights all the cars they can pinpoint and see them weaving in and out of traffic, and specifically Carter's Jeep taking off from when the light turns green, and the other car trying to chase it and pick up to it at the next light. So that's on surveillance footage. And I'm going to read it. This is not just they ran off the road. This was, intense. About a mile from the Waffle House in Athens, the Expedition's right front tire struck a curb. The car flew off the roadway. It sheared 2 utility poles, slammed into at least 2 trees before crashing into an apartment building. Willock, who was the offensive lineman killed, he was not wearing a seatbelt. He flew out of the car from the driver's side second row seat. He was pronounced dead at the scene. LaCroix and Chandler LaCroix, she was a staff member at Georgia, unresponsive, had no pulse when emergency crews arrived. She was pronounced dead at Athens Hospital. On this night, an Athens police officer asked another person to get Carter back at the scene. So he arrived at about 4:15 a.m., an hour and a half after the crash. Again, all this from the AJC. In a videotaped interview, Carter gave the officer an inconsistent account of what he knew about the crash. The documents reviewed show this through the Journal-Constitution. Carter said that he heard the wreck from an apartment complex nearly a mile away. And then later he said he witnessed it from a shorter distance, telling the officer both that he had been behind and beside the car that crashed. Carter denied racing, said he had not been driving fast, but he told the officer that the occupants of the car that crashed were intoxicated. And that's through the documents that were released and reported on. Carter said that he had seen the group downtown. The officer saw no sign that Carter had been drinking. That's also in the record. It's not clear whether the police questioned Carter about why he left the scene or where he went, but the story changed. And also, they didn't take his BAC with the toxicology reports because he wasn't on the scene there at the time, and it had been an hour and 15 minutes later, hour and a half later, so to speak. So a lot of questions with this. And those, I believe, are the details that he's referring to through his statement.
So the inaccurate information is from the story that has the most information, which would be the AJC story.
Yeah, I would think so. But the question is, if you left and you were side by side with the car that crashed, why did you continue to go and not come back? That's the obvious question to ask.
Yeah, and we can jump to conclusions all we want. He's going to have a defense attorney. He's going to go back and try to get his name exonerated in this case, and we'll find out the facts that happened from this point on. Either way, is this another claim of wrong place, wrong time, or was something really dumb being done during this? All the evidence points towards just something really dumb was happening with the speeds that were going, with the toxicology report of the people who died in this. There were some bad things going on, and Jalen Carter was in some way around what was happening and then left the scene. Now, he may come out and claim that none of this is true, even though the police report and everything else is saying there's camera footage of all of this happening. So we'll have to wait and see what's next.
And he was clocked going at least 83 miles per hour in a 40-mile-per-hour zone because he was neck and neck with the other vehicle that ultimately was involved with the crash. Kirby Smart released this statement earlier this afternoon. The charges announced today are deeply concerning, especially as we are still struggling to cope with the devastating loss of 2 beloved members of our community. We will continue to cooperate fully with the authorities while supporting those families, assessing what we can learn from this horrible tragedy. That from Kirby Smart, head coach of the Bulldogs.
It's just crazy to me that you look at this from an SEC perspective with Brandon Miller and now this. You're talking about 2 guys. One is most likely will be the first pick in the NBA draft out of the conference. Another guy who could be the first pick in the NFL draft out of the conference. Both involved, Hutton, on the exact same day.
Yeah, January 15th.
January 15th, 2023, in incidents that resulted in the loss of life, tragically, to young people. Different circumstances, not equating both and saying it's the exact same thing or any of that, but it's crazy when you pile these things up and say this is what happened with arguably the 2 most talented men in the SEC in football and in basketball on the exact same day. Crazy.
Yeah. And, is this further Another reason why we hear people point to the fact that, well, if you can't be at the top unless you're going to have, guys that are rough around the edges, like that's kind of the line of thinking. I don't have to necessarily subscribe to that, but the teams at top. I mean, if you think about the top teams and just the issues at Georgia, going back a ways from Isaiah Wilson, right? Like we're going back a few years there,
Yeah.
but there are plenty of factors that were overlooked in the draft process then as well. And Chad, I'm telling you, the fact that this pops up on the day he's at the combine, is that a coincidence?
Look, no, it's not a coincidence.
I don't think so
The
either.
timing of it, he was hours away from taking the podium to talk with media. I don't think any of that's a coincidence. And I'm just going to go back now to the point on both Jermaine Burton at Alabama and Brandon Miller at Alabama. Things will happen. No one would expect a murder to happen within a team and then something like this tragedy with Georgia football also. But multiple things happen over the course of a year at almost every athletic program in some way, shape, or form, right? My issue is with how the adults handle it and whether or not there's discipline and whether or not you're attempting to get people to learn something from it. Now, with Jalen Carter, he's no longer under Kirby Smart's jurisdiction. So There's nothing Kirby Smart can do other than cooperate with authorities and talk about whatever he can with them and try to move forward with this. At Alabama, with Brandon Miller, there was an opportunity for Nate Oates to be about something more than just wins and losses with him. And instead, to me, he took the coward's way out with Brandon Miller and did nothing. And this guy continues to play with everything else circulating around that awful story. So, look, that's what I'm more concerned with is how does the program, how does university handle something when bad things happen? They're going to happen. Guys are going to get in trouble. Things are going to go awry. We've talked about certain position groups and teams and sports. You're going to have some guys you got to keep your thumb on, as an old coach once told me, from time to time, and maybe worry about a little bit. No one's hoping to worry about something this extreme with it, but it's about how you handle it when things arise. To me, and at least with the Alabama situation, it was handled terribly.
And I have only with Jalen Carter until today, I've only heard solid stories about him behind the scenes, where he would pay for the walk-ons' meals, for instance, and other things that he's done in the community. So crazy ramifications for a awful decision to leave. And that's really the question that needs to be answered. Why the panic, the troublesome decision to say you were a mile away and then later say, no, I was there.